Hello, and welcome to this Unity tutorial. I'm Josh, and today we're going to be talking about Unity's Animator, which is possibly my favorite function that Unity comes built in with. Because not only can you use it to animate anything that you want in your game, you can also use it to control code, which is an incredibly useful function that I'm going to show you how to use today. So, as you can see, we have a completely blank scene. I'm going to start from scratch to show you how it's done. And the first thing that I'm going to do is this is going to be for a 2D sprite animation. You can of course use the animator for 3D as well, but I'm less familiar with that, so we're going to work with 2D. And the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to implement some sprite sheets. I'm going to grab some that I've already got made up, and I'm going to drag them into this scene. So first I'm just going to open up my folder that's got a couple of my sprite sheets in it, and I'm going to just drag them into my scene. I'm going to grab that one and this one. We don't need anything too terribly complicated. These are just sprites that I've made up for like a Castlevania clone that I'm doing for the sake of practice. And as I mentioned in my last video, if you happen to watch it, organization is important. So I'm going to make a folder for my sprites. And I'm just going to drag these in here. Open this up. So when you drag in a sprite sheet, which in order to make a sprite sheet, one of the things that I'm going to tell you to do is separate out your individual intended sprites by 1 pixel. So if I right click on, or if I left click on the sprite sheet, it's going to open up in the inspector here a drop down menu for sprite mode, along with a couple other things, but we're not going to worry about that right now. Right now we need sprite mode, and then we're going to click on multiple. And this is going to allow us to open up the Sprite Editor. We'll hit apply for the multiple, and it's going to open up this screen here, where we can then use this drop down for slice. And this is going to let us cut up this single image of 4 separate sprites and turn it into 4 separate images, one for each sprite. So we're going to do it by grid by cell size. This is going to let us define exactly how big each sprite needs to be. So I know for a fact, because I made this one and I tested this already, that it's 11 pixels, because the sprite is 9 pixels, and then, like I said, you want to have 1 blank in the front and 1 blank in the back. We're going to hit slice, and you can see that it cuts them up just like this. The reason that I say that you need to have that space between them rather than having each of them basically touching each other is that even though it would be sliced through at like the pixels cleanly, for some reason I've observed that there's typically almost like a tiny little fragment of the next sprite in the front or the back of it that ends up getting shaved off into each individual sprite. So pretty much it's going to create an awkward, almost like black bar look on the left and right of your sprite, and it just doesn't look good. So always have these single pixels to divide each of your sprites, just so you don't have that problem. So we're going to hit apply. I'm going to exit out of here, and then I'm going to do the same thing for this one. Multiple, Sprite Editor, apply, slice. This one I know is 20, and I'm going to adjust the X height. You can do any number that's bigger than the overall sprite count, and it will just automatically snap it to whatever the maximum height of your sprite sheet is. You don't need to give it an exact value for the Y value, which is convenient if you're using only single row sprite sheets. So we're going to apply, get rid of this. And now I'm going to drag in this sprite sheet up here and turn it into a game object. Click on it, and I'm just going to scale it up for ease of seeing it in the game when we play. So boom, there we go. Now we've got this object. I'm just going to name it bat rather than bat sprite sheet. And we're going to go to add component, and we're going to put on an animator. Not an animation, this is important, an animator. So we're going to click on that, and here you're going to see it has a box for a controller. So we need to make this controller. So I'm going to go back to my assets. I'm going to create another folder for my animations. Click on this, and I'm going to right click, say create Animator Controller. I'm going to call it BAT, just because right now I'm not going to be dealing with many, so it's fine to give it a simple name like that. I'm going to drag it over to this animator. Okay? So, we're going to be working in two windows that if they are not already docked onto your Unity scene, you can open them up here in the Window tab, and you're going to go to Animation. We're going to want both the Animation and Animator windows. So I have my Animator window up here and the Animation window down here. This is how I like it set up. You set up your Unity space however you want. So the Animator is going to show us everything that the controller has in it. And the animation is going to control what are called animation clips. So in order to demonstrate how these work, I'm just going to start by making some clips. So I'm going to hit create here with the bat highlighted. Okay, this is important that you're going to create clips for whatever object you have selected in your hierarchy. So I'm going to say create, now that I've got the bat selected, and it's going to ask me to make an asset. So I'm just going to call it bat. That's fine. We can keep everything very simple. And you'll see here in my animations that I have this square looking thing called bat, and then this triangle one that I also called bat, lowercase. The one that's the square with the two boxes, this is your controller. And any of the triangles, they're your clips. So now I have this window open here, and I can do one of two things to get in the properties that I want. I can go to my sprites, which is what I would do in this case. I'm going to open up the drop down for my bat sprite sheet, and this is where all of the individual sprites that we sliced out have gone. So I'm going to just shift click all of these and drag them in here. Boom. And it's going to just lay them out in sequence. So if I were to open up my scene and hit play, you're going to see that technically it's animating. Now it's way too fast. It sets them up just one sprite apart from, or one frame apart from each other. And that's just no good. So what we can do is we can grab, now that all of these are diamonds here, they're called keyframes. They're going to indicate each individual sprite or occurrence in your animation. And if you have all of them highlighted, you'll get these blue bars here that you can grab and drag, and it will separate them to be proportional to each other. So I'm going to just drag this out to be over to where it says 30. And I'm going to hit play. And there we go. It's much smoother. So you can just drag out all of your keyframes to make a smoother looking animation, whether you need it faster or slower. And you can separate your keyframes individually if you want to make certain parts of your animation last longer or shorter. So just take into account whatever your sprite sheet is going to want, how long you want each individual sprite to be on screen, and you can control all of that individually from this animation controller here. So the other thing that you can do to add components to your animation is you can use this add property button. So if I click on this, you'll see that it has a transform and a sprite renderer. And it has these options specifically because these are the things that are in the inspector tab on the game object that we're working with. So we have a transform and a sprite renderer, as well as an animator, but we're not going to be manipulating that with any of our animations, so there's no reason for it to be on the list. If you had other components, like say, I'm going to add a box collider 2D, and then if I go to add property, that is here as well. So we can do things like controlling if a box collider is enabled by just putting it here in the animation. And this is a great component if you're doing like a melee combat thing, you have an attack animation, and you can turn on the collider to inflict damage at a specific frame, and then you can turn it off all in here. You don't even need to utilize any code to manipulate that. It's awesome. So I'm going to just, for example, I'm going to add a transform, and I'm going to add a scale. So here we have the little bar that controls where we are on our animation. I'm going to put it over to 0 with these keyframes highlighted, and it says my scale is 10 and 10, which is what we set it to originally. Perfect. We want it to stay that way. So now I'm going to come over here. I'm going to drag the bar over to the end keyframe, click on these, and I'm going to change the scale here to 100. And it's going to fill in everything in between. So you see it creates a progressive adjustment rather than going from 0 all the way to here and then snapping to 100 here. If you don't have keyframes in between, it's going to do this kind of sliding progression. Now, if that's not what you want, what you can do is the keyframe before it gets to 100, you can add another keyframe. So here you got this button that says add keyframe, or you can right click. You can do either or. Say add keys. So I could do this, and then I can change this scale where it's currently 99.725 and just set this to 10. So that way there is no transition, because since 10 and 10 are obviously the same, it's not going to move at all, and then on the last frame it's going to snap to be big. So if you want to prevent that sliding, that's how you would do it. Okay? I'm going to clear out this one because I just kind of like this growing look. But we're going to do something else now. We're going to add another clip to this controller. So first I'm going to open up the animator, and I'm going to show you something real quick. So all of the clips that we make are going to go into the Animator Controller, which we can see through the Animator tab. And see how we have this bat here? It's orange, which tells us that this is the default animation state for the game object. And here in the motion, we've got this triangle with the bat. As we talked about before, this is our bat clip. Now if we click here and we right click, we can create another state. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to say create state empty, and I'm going to call it walk. So while this technically, what I'm about to do isn't going to make sense in the scope of like what you would do in a game, like these aren't animations that you would put together, but for demonstration purposes, I'm going to now create an animation clip. So I'm going to click on my bat again. I'm going to go to this drop down here and say create new clip. I'm going to call it walk. But first I'm going to go make sure I'm in my animations folder and call it walk. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the player's walk cycle. I'm going to select these. I'm going to drag it in here. And I'm just going to separate them out. And then I'm just going to click on this here, and we can see that walk has populated into this motion path. If this were empty, if this said none, we can just go into our animations, grab it from here, and drag it in. Boom. So now if we were to hit play, it's just going to go through the bat animation where it's flapping and growing. And it's never going to go to walk because there's no transition from bat to walk. Now we can change this by right-clicking on the bat little bubble here, say make transition, and then we'll have control of this arrow, and we can make it point to any state that we want. So we're going to click on walk, and it'll snap to it. And then if we click on this arrow in between, we have a transition controller thing here. So there's a couple things to look at. So we've got has exit time. Now this is going to make it so that the animation has to end Like, it has to go through all of its frames before it will transition over, and you can adjust it with the settings as to how long the exit time will play for. And if you're doing 2D sprite animation where you're snapping from one sprite to the other, I'm going to suggest that you turn off has exit time, as well as setting your transition duration and your transition offsets to 0. The reason is, as you're transitioning, if these numbers are not 0, or if you have exit time on, one animation is still going to be playing underneath your other animation as it transitions. It's going to start this one, but this one's not going to have ended yet, and it's going to create a little bit of awkwardness. Now, the reason that you would use something like that is if you're doing, say, a fading transition where something's transparency is being lowered and something else is like coming in as the other thing is like fading out. That can lead to some smoothness issues if you were to just snap it from one to the other. Using this can help you smooth those two things together by giving yourself some exit time and some duration for the crossover. Because you'll see here, if we adjust the transition duration time, this area here that's kind of got this blue diagonal line that's highlighted here, this is like the transitional period. This is where you would like get the two at one time kind of fading thing. Again, with this kind of 2D snapping to just another sprite animation, don't want that. No good. And I said that exit time would play all of the animation. That's not necessarily 100% true. I realize that I shouldn't have said that. It's just going to last. It's going to set up a timer that you can set here with the exit time that's going to change how long it takes for the transition to occur. All right. Now, the more important thing that you need to know about is how to actually set up the transition. And the main way that you're going to do that is you're going to use, here we have something that says conditions that are going to utilize parameters. So you'll see here it says list is empty, and if we try to click something, it's not going to do anything. It's going to say parameter does not exist. So we're going to have to come over here to the left side, and we're going to click where this plus drop down is. And it's going to give us 4 options: a float, int, bool, and trigger. And you can set up transitions using any of these things, but perhaps the simplest one that I'm going to show you is bool. So I'm going to make 2 of these actually. I'm going to call one bat. I'm going to call one walk. Very simple. Boom. So we're starting in the bat state. So to transition to the walk state, I'm going to add a condition that says walk and require it to be true. Now you can set whether or not the base state is true or false by checking these boxes, just like you would on a game object in its own inspector. So having these both checked would mean they default to true. So I want both of them to default to false. We could make the bat initially true, but since bat state is already set to be the initial state, it's not necessary. So now I'm going to right click on the walk and say make transition to bat. I'm going to click on this one. I'm going to scroll down, say add condition, and then I'm going to use bat is true. It already knew what I wanted because it only had so many conditions to pick from. So that's great, but you could change it to any conditions that you had set up. And I'm going to turn off the exit time. I'm going to turn off the transit. Actually, I'm going to leave the transition duration on because I'm going to show you what that looks like. All right. And now all I have to do is make these parameters actually trigger somehow. And I'm going to do that with a little script. So I'm going to go into my assets. I'm not going to bother making a folder for this because it's just going to be one script. I'll call it bat animation. I'm going to double click this to open it up in Visual Studios. And then I'm going to delete the update function. Don't need it. Get rid of this comment line just because it's clutter and messy. And I'm going to first reference the animator because we can't control it if we're not referencing it. So I'm going to say public animator, if I can spell. I'm going to just call it anim. This is how most people are going to notate their animator. They're just going to call it anim. So in start, we're going to click here. We're going to say anim because we have to set up a reference for our animator. We have to get something. So we're going to say get component and do these carets and say animator. And then we're going to have to close this off with some parentheses and a semicolon. Boom. So now what this is going to do, since this script is going to be going on the bat, the get component call is going to look at all of the components that are on the bat's inspector. And it's going to find whatever we put in here. So we want it to find the animator. And when it does, it'll pick up the animation controller, and then we can utilize its parameters from there. So now I'm going to say, I'm going to make two methods. I'm going to say public void walk trigger, and I'm going to make a second one. It's going to say public void bat trigger. And then what I'm going to do in each of these is I'm going to set their respective parameters. So we're going to say anim dot set bool. And then if we, this is a cool little trick that I'm going to show you, is that when you highlight or when you mouse over something, it will give you the notation that it needs to be done in. So it says animator dot set bool. And then we can see it has, in the parentheses, string name and bool value. So that tells us kind of how it wants us to write this. So I'm going to create a parentheses, and then the first thing is the name of the parameter, which since that is in the form of a string, that means we need to use quotation marks. And it needs to read out exactly how it's written in the parameters, capitalization included. So I capitalize both of my parameters, so I'm going to say walk just like that. And then I'm going to identify that I'm going to the next little value here by hitting a comma, space that over, and then we're going to decide what the state's going to be. So we want it to be true. Boom. So now when the walk trigger method is called, we're going to set the walk bool in the animator to true. And then I'm going to do something with the bat trigger. It's going to be the exact same thing. So anim.setBool bat, comma, true. Now, if I leave it like this though, each one is going to be set to true after each one is called once, and then we're not going to be able to set them again, and they're just kind of going to flash back and forth every frame trying to play the next one, and it's just going to become a mess. You're not going to be able to transition smoothly between these two. So in order to prevent that, we're going to turn off the other one first. So we're going to say here anim.setBool bat, false. And I'm just going to copy this, paste it, and set to false. Boom. Now, when walk trigger is called, it will turn off the bat first, and then it will turn on walk, and then the bat trigger will do vice versa. Now, like I mentioned, you can manipulate code as well in the animator, which is going to make this very easy for us. So we're going to first take our bat animation script, and we're going to drag it onto our bat. That's important, because next what we're going to use this button here where it says add event. And And here we'll get on the very top of the bar this kind of long, almost like bookmark type thing. And we're going to set it to the very end. And now you'll see here in the inspector that it has a function drop down. And if I click on this, it's going to have the functions or the methods that we wrote. So we're going to set the walk trigger on the bat, and we're going to go over to the walk, and we're going to create another event, and we're going to drag it to the last frame, and we're going to say bat trigger. And now whenever the animation gets to that event, it's going to call that method or that function. And now you need to make sure though that the script is on the component or on the game object that these animations are related to. If I had dragged the bat animation script onto, say, the main camera or any other game object, I wouldn't be able to reference it in the animator. It can only look at the things that are on the game object that you're currently animating. So keep that in mind. So now, if there's one more thing that I'm going to do, and that is that if I click on here, you can see this menu here in the inspector. You know, it shows your motion. You can change the speed of the animation, as well as a couple other things. I'm not going to get into these. They're more complicated than I want to talk about in a beginner's guide. But if you click on it, if you double click it, it's going to open up the clip inspector. And there's one more thing that I want to talk about, and that is loop time. Loop time is going to make the animation continuously loop on itself over and over. This is great for things like idle animations or just static objects that you just want to go through a certain animation cycle over and over. If you want that, you keep your loop time on. If it's something that's only going to play once though when you call it, you're going to turn it off. So say you're doing something like an attack. You don't want to press your button one time and your person just gets locked in an attacking animation. You want it to do one time and then go back to its original pose, and if it's in idle from there, just continue looping the idle. So since we're using the code to control our transitions consistently, so it will never loop by the code anyway, we're just going to clean this up and turn off loop time on both of these. Okay? So now I'm going to hit play. You'll see it, the animation playing down here, and then you'll be able to watch some blue bars over here showing the animation. So you can see here that the blue bar goes away immediately when the bat meets the end, and it goes to the walk cycle. But the walk continues to loop. This is what I was talking about that I want to show you with this here transition duration. It continues to do that little blip because of the transition. If I were to set this to 0, boom, it's going to stop. And that's why I like setting these to 0 when we're doing this kind of sprite animation. Okay? But yeah, as you can see, it just cycles through, it plays the animation, it snaps over to the next one, and it just keeps on going back and forth. Very simple, very easy to use. It's a great tool. You can have multiple objects moving around all under the same controller, and I think is one of the most fun tools to play with in Unity. There's a lot more complexity to it than I've gotten into today, but for now I'm just going to leave it here and say you should know everything that you need to know to look up another tutorial that gets a bit more complicated. Alright, so thank you for stopping by and checking this out. I hope you learned something, and I will see you next time.